Depeche Mode were one of the early pioneers, adopters of sampling, and sampling, in fact, was a key part of their signature sound. In this video, I'm going to run through some of the sounds, and I'm also going to talk to you how some of the old school sampling approaches have influenced me and the way I work these days. This is Geek Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. Now, I'm respectful of your time, grateful for you to be here. I know you're busy, so straight off the bat, I'm going to tell you what you can expect in this video and what you cannot expect in this video. I do not want you to watch this video and get right to the end and accuse me of being clickbaity, because we do not do clickbait here. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to run through some of the original Depeche Mode sounds from the original sample banks, and I'm also going to play the sounds in isolation, and we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm also going to explain to you how this old school approach of sampling really has influenced my workflow. So if that floats your boat, let's go for it. And if it doesn't, adios. I think it's fair to say that Depeche Mode were a pioneering force in sampling. Of course, we do not omit the importance of Gareth Jones and Daniel Miller, who were obviously fostering and mentoring Depeche Mode in those earlier days. A lot of the stuff they were doing at the time was groundbreaking. In fact, with the many conversations I've had with Gareth Jones, he's spoken about how what they did, they just did. There wasn't any sort of like thinking, okay, we're going to be pioneers or anything. They were just doing what they did with the technology they had at the time. And they didn't realize that 40 odd years, more than 40 years later, we'd still be citing some of those early records as absolutely groundbreaking. And sampling, along with its limitations, I think limitation is such an important thing. I'm always on about limitation, because you've often heard me say that necessity is the mother of invention. And that is indeed, I feel these days, we have so much technology, and that technology in a way kind of, I don't want to say it limits our creativity, but because you've got this endless supply of technology at your fingertips and things are so accessible, it just makes decision making very, very difficult when coming up with a record idea or a song. I do always come back to this period, the early days of electronic music, where what they were doing at the time was groundbreaking. And in fact, when you listen to a lot of those records these days, they still sound, innovative. And something that we've lost in modern production is we've lost character. It seems as though a lot of the earlier artists, and please call me an old man stuck in the past, it's just that if you listen to a lot of those records of that time, they just had a signature sound. Every artist sounded different, and everyone had their own approach. And they were also pushing the frontiers of the technology. Very often they were using the technology in a way that it was not designed for, and you had to really think out the box in order to achieve the results. And it's because of that we had such great innovation. You just need to go back to some of these older records and listen to them. And although you could criticize them as not being as technically polished and slick by today's standards, there is a soul and a sincerity and just a signature authenticity which shines through in a lot of those older records. And I do believe that it was not only down to the mindset, but also due to the limitations in technology. So what you hear there is one of the sound banks from the original Depeche Mode sample banks. And this sound bank I have here is from Alan's keyboard rig.
Warning! Warning! Alan Wilder, fanboy alert! Warning! Warning!
This is from Alan's keyboard rig from the 1993-94 devotional tour. Now, what I want to point out to you is, listen to this. This, of course, from the Mercy in You. Now, let's listen to this sound in isolation. What I'm trying to point out here is when you play these melodies in isolation, meaning there's no backing track, you're just hearing them in isolation, you can kind of hear the seams and, sometimes where they've been chopped up. And this is where you just get this great character that I'm going to try and articulate in my best way. Listen to this. You can hear the oscillation. Listen to it. Now, as we get to the higher note, can you hear the oscillation is faster? Yeah, that. Now, listen to the lower note. Now, if this was a sound from a VST plugin, a synthesizer, sound within a plugin, it wouldn't necessarily do that. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that we're at a point now where technology is so advanced that things just can sound beautiful and they can sound perfect. And I'm trying to point out here that all these nuances and these so-called imperfections, and I'm not criticizing Alan Wilder's sampling ability, that's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to point out that although these sounds in isolation, they sound brilliant, they might sound a bit off or a little bit, juxtaposed and a bit abrupt, but it is the cumulative effect of all these so-called imperfections which are, it's imperfectly perfect. Another example, on the chorus of The Mercy in You, I would do it all again, lose my way and fall again. I'm just singing to give you context there. Now just listen to these parts here. This is a choir part with other elements. Now, the point I'm trying to make is listen how the notes, when you move from one note to the next, how it's not completely seamless. Now, I'm not criticizing it. It's as a fan, I find these sounds beautiful. It's just that, and I'll point some other examples at you where the sort of the seams are more abrupt. It's just that in this way, where the sounds weren't perfectly seamless, it just gives so much character. And just if you allow me to segue slightly, I always talk to my students, and certainly when I'm making music, I always like to take sounds and give them oxygen. And please, that's not a technical term. What I mean by that is these days we typically, a lot of the time, work in a computer. And what I like to do is if I'm working with a plugin, I like to take the sound out of the computer. And I call that giving it oxygen. So you're taking it out and bringing it out here to give it oxygen. And what I mean by that is I would typically run it through my ISA1 and then through my SSL6. Check out that video I just did on the SSL6 recently, or other bits and pieces I have, because I like to take things out of the computer and thereby give them some oxygen, run them through something that's got circuitry and organic and, like an organic feel to it. And, I'm not incredibly technical, so before you shoot me down, what I'm trying to say is, to me, I make records for me, and you should make records for you. Always do that. Do it for you. This long process of taking things out the box, out of the computer and then re-recording them back in, isn't that a waste of time? Isn't it a waste of productivity? Yes, I guess you could say so. But once again, we as artists take pride in what we do. And I always tell you, you must make your records for you only. Imperfection and limitation is beautiful. And especially when working in today's modern techniques, I think it is more important than ever now to limit yourself to your options, because that'll make you focused and you'll make better music. I promise you, you will. Let's look at another example here. This, of course, is from the song Policy of Truth. This is Martin Gore's keyboard bank. And for the keyboardists out there, if you've watched him live, he will do it this way. Now, what's interesting is, and I've done this on my album review series, you can check that out, link in the description below. Watch this. You've got the bend on this note here. But Martin doesn't do this, because by holding this down, you get the bend. Martin doesn't do that. He doesn't hold it down. He just plays the next note there. It's dun dun instead of dun. It's dun dun dun. More staccato. Okay, where am I going with this? Because these are samples, and you know the way Depeche Mode used to build their sounds was very, very unique. You have samples here, and listen to the way. It's not jerky and it's not wrong. It's just, and it's not abrupt. I don't even know what the word is, but it's just the seams are not flawless. And once again, if this was a sample from a VST, from a plug-in bank, it would have all this dirt in it would drift. It would drift better, it would be smoother, but it would lack the character. And this is why it is so important to me to utilize this old school form of sampling. Now, I'll do a video on it later, but just for some context, obviously I'm part of the band Mesh now, and when we perform live, we have our sounds. And I am really, really influenced by this old school kind of, this old school way of sampling, where you have limitations. You look at samplers in the old days, typically they were hardware units, and sampling was an amazing thing when it first came out, but memory was short, memory was expensive, RAM was very expensive, and you'd have 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and obviously as the technology progressed, you had more and more sampling time. Also with that, the prices came down. Fast forward to the current date now, you have endless possibilities. But I always limit myself. I always take myself back to not that time, but I reference a lot of those older records when I listen and I go, what made those records great? But what is great about today's technology, but what is great about the technology back then? To make my point, when I interviewed Pino Pescatola as part of my album review series, check that video out. Many of you said that was one of my best interviews so far. Pino talks about his time working on the Violator album. And one of the questions I asked Pino in that interview was, Pino, if we had to produce a Violator now, using the technology we have now, would it sound exactly the same? And you'll have to go back and watch that video, but the gist of that was, Pino said something like, yes, of course, technically we could do it today, and it would probably be easier, but it would sound different. Now, I don't want to get into a hypothetical, but even though Violator, in my opinion, is one of the most outstanding electronic records of all time, and according to Kevin Paul, who I had on the channel, who of course did the 5.1 mixes, he takes it a step further, and he actually says that Violator is not one of the most outstanding electronic records of all times. He just says it's the most outstanding record of all times. So get your head around that. So what I like to do with my live sounds, to make it interesting for myself and difficult for myself as well, I guess, I like to, instead of loading up a VST or a plugin within the computer and just playing it through the PA and then for you, the audience, to hear, I like to do a lot of sort of processing. And what I do, as I said before, I like to give it oxygen. So what I would do is, let's say I'm using a VST plugin. We use a lot, let's say it's something like a combination between, let's say, Omnisphere and, let's say, Serum or something like that. Instead of just loading the plugin in and just, tweaking it and then playing it, what I would do is, once I've tweaked the sounds, within the palette and like the particular sound that I want, to play along with the backing track for the particular song, I will then take those sounds and I will export them out of the computer, and then I will run them through the ISA1 and then maybe through the Big 6 again, and I will use different approaches depending on what, sometimes through a distortion or something, but I like to take them out of the box and give them oxygen, so to speak. And then what I do is I will load the sound into the EXS24, or what they call in Logic now the sampler. So in doing that, what you get is it is a long way of doing it, but you're loading the sample in, let's say at a reference note of C or whatever, and then you're stretching it. And so it's the same sound, but it's definitely giving you a different type of feel. So when you're playing a melody, it's giving you that kind of slightly staccato, slightly different. It just doesn't sound as flawless as if you played it directly from a plugin. Depending on how far you stretch the sample, sometimes you get certain nuances and stuff. And so I have a lot of fun with that. So instead of just, once again, playing from the sounds that I've created using the soft synths, I will export them and then I will sample them back in to the sampler in Logic EXS24. And obviously there's a lot of combinations. I will use my Moog there and other bits and pieces. I've got some other synths that I don't have out here. In fact, I will do a video on my mesh sounds because I know a lot of you have asked me to do that. But for the purpose of this video, just know that that is how I like to work. I like to take stuff out of the box, manipulate it, and then actually sample it back in. And then instead of having the VST loaded, the plugin, you're actually playing back samples. You're playing back the melodies. And if you A/B the actual sound, once it's sampled versus playing it back compared to the layered sounds, VST sounds, there is a difference. It certainly has a quirkiness and an oddness to it, and that really suits the type of music that mesh is, and it just gives it a texture. And now it is a long-winded way of doing it, but hey man, if you're as passionate as what I am, and I'm sure a lot of you are, this is the way I do it, and maybe a video later with a little bit more in-depth detail of how I do that. Now, just to further elaborate, here I have the original Martin Gore Soundbank from the Devotional Tour, and this is Halo. Bit of inside information here. That sound came from a sample CD, and apparently it is the sound of a horn on a ship or a tugboat or something. We'll talk about that later, but I want to show you, there are some string sounds here on Martin's Soundbank. Now just listen to this. Now once again, contrary to popular belief, there was the whole thing where Depeche Mode never use the same sound twice, make your sounds from scratch. Depeche Mode, of course, were pioneers, but there are some people who think that the sounds were created from scratch every single time, meaning they would start with a blank palette and they would pull up a sine wave and a saw wave and then blend it and we got what we got. No, not at all. There were indeed presets used even in the Alan Wilder time. If you just pull up the Emacs Soundbank, those of you who've got the Emacs libraries, you will probably be able to vouch for this. A lot of the sounds you hear in there are quite Depeche Mode-y sounding, so there are indeed presets from the Emacs library which made its way onto the record. Obviously not that rawly. Maybe there'd be like a string sound they would find and it would be layered and combined, and there was a lot of manipulation to the sounds, a lot of editing, a lot of sampling and all that clever stuff. The point I'm trying to make is some people think that every sound you hear on a Depeche Mode album is completely created from scratch. Not so at all. Different video. But back to these string sounds. These string sounds are actually samples. They were not generated by Depeche Mode. They were taken from a record, and I will find the reference. But the point I'm trying to make here is not only how rich these sounds are, but just listen how they blend from one note to the next. See, so it could essentially be this one note which has been time stretched, to create more notes. But the point I'm trying to make is, you see, as it moves to the next note, there's this, it's not abrupt, I don't know what the word is, but it's very often with sampling, you can hear the seams, you can hear how it's been cut. And the point I'm trying to make is, it is within that limitation that they had in those times is the reason why. I come back to it once again. If we take an album like Violator or Songs of Faith and Devotion, I believe if those albums were made now, they'd probably be better technically. Maybe they'd be mixed better and stuff. I don't know. But that's not what music's about. It's about capturing a moment and, it's capturing the essence of you as an artist and everything that happened at the time. The limitation which was around at the time due to the technology is what gives it such a signature sound. Limitation is beautiful. Imperfection is perfect. Anyway, as you can see, I'm getting really carried away. Yeah, I can't help myself. I'm really passionate. So if you feel this passion and you want to share this passion with me, I will ask you to please hit that subscribe button and join this fabulous community. I'm available for one-on-one coaching. I'm always happy to hear from you, and I'm always happy to help and to learn and to help you grow. All the information is in the description below. If you're interested, and time permitting, I'd be delighted to help you. So, just to summarize, I always take my sounds out of the box. I give them oxygen, run them through as many interesting pieces I can find, get the character, then I run them back, or I sample them back into a sampler. So I'm essentially sampling the sounds from the VSTs. Instead of playing the VST, I just play it back through the sampler. Not always. Sometimes I will do that, and sometimes there's a combination where I will layer it with, a VST in the background. Every approach is different. I understandably give myself a lot of work, but hey man, this is what I do and I love it. Now, that's the way I do it. Tell me how you do it. Anything you have found useful from this, let me know in the comments below. Anything you do that you would like to elaborate on, leave your comments in the description below. I'm Vaughn George. I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Lots of love. Adios.